I stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar I'd circled in red marker months ago, May 15th, my daughter Sophia's college graduation. I'd taken the day off work, pressed my best suit, and even bought a bouquet of yellow roses, her favorite since she was a little girl. The ceremony was supposed to start at 2 p.m., but it was already noon, and I still hadn't received any details about where to meet her. I picked up my phone and called her for the third time that morning. Finally, she answered. "Hey, Dad." Her voice sounded distant, almost hollow. "Sophia, I'm getting ready to drive out. Which building is the ceremony in again?" I asked, already gathering my car keys. There was a long pause. Too long. "It's already over," she whispered. "We didn't invite you." I felt my hand go numb around the phone. The yellow roses on the counter seemed to dim before my eyes. "What do you mean? I've had this date marked for months," I said, my voice suddenly thin. "Mum thought it would be better this way. With her new husband and everything." Her voice trailed off. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight on my chest. 4 years of sending tuition checks, of late-night calls about difficult professors, of care packages during finals week, and I wasn't even worth an invitation. "I've got to go, Dad. We're having lunch at the Harrison." Her voice had an edge of guilt. "Mum's watching me. I wasn't supposed to tell you." The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. The Harrison, the upscale restaurant downtown, where my ex-wife Diane and I had celebrated our 15th anniversary, just months before she told me she'd fallen in love with someone else. I sat down at the kitchen table, surrounded by the life I'd rebuilt after the divorce. A modest house in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Massachusetts, filled with photos of a daughter who apparently no longer wanted me in her life. 5 years had passed since Diane left, taking 16-year-old Sophia with her to a lakeside mansion with her new husband, Robert Caldwell, a successful investment banker 20 years her senior. The custody arrangement had given me weekends, but as Sophia entered her senior year of high school, those visits became more sporadic. College at Amherst widened the gap further. Holidays spent with her mother's new family in their vacation home in Vermont. Summers interning at Robert's firm. I'd told myself it was normal for a young woman to drift from her father. But this, being deliberately excluded from one of the most important days of her life, this wasn't normal. I glanced at my reflection in the window. At 52, I wasn't the man I used to be. My hair had thinned, and the stress of trying to keep my small accounting firm afloat during the recession had left permanent lines around my eyes. But I was still her father. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't embarrass her, but I needed to understand why. What had I done to deserve this complete erasure from her milestone moment? The drive to the Harrison took 20 minutes, each mile fueled not with anger but with a deep, aching confusion. Had I been too lenient after the divorce, too afraid to discipline her for fear she'd choose to live with her mother full-time? Or had Robert's influence turned her against me more than I realized? I parked across the street from the restaurant and sat watching the entrance. The midday sun glinted off the glass doors as waiters in crisp white shirts ushered in guests. And then I saw them. Diane, in an elegant blue dress, her arm linked with Robert's. He was smiling broadly, his silver hair catching the light. Behind them came Sophia in her graduation gown, the tassel on her cap swinging as she laughed at something Robert said. My daughter's face was radiant, happier than I'd seen her in years. Following them was a small procession of people I recognized as Robert's family. His 2 adult sons from his first marriage, his elderly mother in a wheelchair, pushed by what appeared to be a private nurse. They looked like a perfect family unit, complete and content, without a single space where I might fit. As they disappeared into the restaurant, I realized something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just about today's graduation. Something had been happening for years that I'd failed to see or perhaps refused to acknowledge. The way Sophia's tone changed when she spoke about Robert. The sudden cancellations when I'd planned father-daughter outings. The reluctance to bring friends to my house. I started the car again, but I didn't head back home. Instead, I drove toward Amherst College. If I couldn't be part of her celebration, I could at least see where my daughter had spent the last 4 years of her life, years documented in brief texts and rushed phone calls. What I didn't know then was that this painful revelation at the Harrison wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of uncovering a web of lies that had been spun around me for years. And the truth would be far more devastating than I could have imagined. The Amherst College campus was beautiful in mid-May. Flowering trees lining pathways where students in caps and gowns posed for photos with proud families. I parked near the main quad and watched from a distance, an outsider looking in on the celebration I should have been part of. A group of faculty members walked past, still in their academic regalia. On impulse, I approached them. "Excuse me," I said to a woman with silver-streaked hair. "The English department graduation, was that this morning?" She smiled politely. "English? No, that was yesterday afternoon. Today was business and economics." I felt a cold shock run through me. "Economics? My daughter is graduating today, Sophia Jennings?" The woman's smile faded slightly. "Sophia Jennings? I know Sophia. She was one of my advisees, but she's in the English program, not economics." My confusion must have been apparent on my face, because another professor stepped forward. "Are you Thomas Jennings, Sophia's father?" "Yes," I said, relief washing over me that someone recognized the connection. The man extended his hand. "I'm Professor Dalton. I had Sophia in several classes. Brilliant writer." He hesitated. "But Professor Harmon is right. Sophia graduated yesterday with the English department. The ceremony was at 4. "That's not possible," I said, my voice hollow. "She called me an hour ago, said the ceremony just finished." The professors exchanged a glance that made my stomach tighten. "Sir," Professor Dalton said carefully, "I'm certain Sophia graduated yesterday. In fact, I spoke with her afterward. She mentioned she was heading to Boston with her family today. Boston, not a local lunch at the Harrison. Another lie. I thanked them and walked away, my mind spinning. I pulled out my phone and opened the alumni directory app Sophia had helped me download months ago. "So you can see my thesis presentation, Dad." I searched her name, Sophia Jennings, English department, summa cum laude. And below that, her thesis title, "The Absent Father. Patterns of Paternal Abandonment in Contemporary American Fiction." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my eyes filled with unexpected tears. Had she seen me that way, as an absent father? I'd never missed a child support payment, never turned down a chance to see her when she allowed it. I scrolled through my phone to the last email Sophia had sent me 3 weeks ago. She'd asked for an additional $5,000 for graduation expenses. I'd sent it without question, happy to be included in some small way. Sitting in my car, I opened my banking app and reviewed the transfers I'd made to Sophia over the past 4 years. Tuition, yes, but also thousands in emergency expenses, textbook funds, study abroad fees, money that had flowed freely from my accounts because I'd always wanted to prove I could provide for her just as well as Robert could. A new, uncomfortable thought entered my mind. Had I been manipulated, used as a convenient ATM while being pushed further from her life? I needed answers. I drove back toward the Harrison, but the group had already left. On a hunch, I called my neighbor, Janet, who worked as a travel agent. "Janet, it's Tom. I need a favor. Can you tell me if there are any reservations under Robert Caldwell for flights to Boston today?" Janet hesitated. "Tom, you know I can't just look up random people's—" "Please," I interrupted. "It's about Sophia. Something's wrong." 5 minutes later, Janet called back. "There's a private jet scheduled from Springfield to Boston at 3 p.m. today. The manifest lists Robert Caldwell, Diane Caldwell, and Sophia Jennings. And the return. That's the thing, Tom. It's one way. And they checked 6 large bags. Not a day trip. A departure." I thanked her and immediately called Sophia again. Straight to voicemail. I tried Diane's number, something I rarely did since the divorce. Also, voicemail. Acting on instinct, I drove to the small private airfield outside town. The parking lot was nearly empty on a Saturday afternoon, but I spotted Diane's silver Mercedes in a reserved space. I approached the terminal building slowly, uncertain what I was doing. Through the glass doors, I could see them, Robert, Diane, and Sophia, seated in a private lounge area. Robert was on his phone, gesturing emphatically. Diane was flipping through a magazine, and Sophia was staring blankly at the wall, looking nothing like the radiant graduate I'd seen earlier. I was about to push through the doors when Robert ended his call and said something to Sophia. She nodded, then pulled out her own phone. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Dad, I know you're upset about graduation. I'm sorry. Need space right now. I'll call in a few weeks when I'm settled." Settled where? I watched through the glass as she set down her phone without looking at it again. Her expression hadn't changed. There was no emotion, no relief at having reached out to me. It was as if she'd been instructed to send the message. I stepped back out of their line of sight. Something was deeply wrong. Sophia hadn't just excluded me from her graduation. She'd lied about when it happened. She'd taken money from me under false pretenses. And now she was leaving on a one-way flight, cutting off communication. As I returned to my car, I spotted a young woman in an airport staff uniform taking a smoke break near the entrance. "Excuse me," I said, approaching carefully. "I'm trying to find out where the Caldwell party is heading today. My daughter is traveling with them, and I need to get her medication to her before they leave." The woman glanced at the building, then back at me. "They're going to Boston first, but their final destination is Switzerland. Geneva, I think. Mr. Caldwell mentioned something about his new banking position there." Switzerland, an international move that no one had bothered to tell me about. I drove home in a daze, the yellow roses still on my kitchen counter when I returned. I picked them up and threw them in the trash, then sat at my computer. I searched Robert Caldwell's name along with Switzerland and found a press release from 3 months ago. Caldwell named Chief Operations Officer at Helvetic Global Bank, effective June 1st. 3 months. They'd been planning this move for at least 3 months, and not once had Sophia mentioned it. Not when she asked for extra graduation money. Not during our brief phone calls. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of it all. Then I noticed the small stack of mail on my desk. Among the bills was a thick envelope from Amherst College. I opened it to find Sophia's graduation program. Inside was a handwritten note on college stationery. "Mr. Jennings, your daughter asked me to mail this to you. She said there was a miscommunication about the ceremony date. I'm sorry you missed it. She's a remarkable young woman and spoke highly of you in our advisement sessions. Professor Harmon." Attached to the note was a USB drive labeled Thesis Presentation. With trembling hands, I plugged it into my computer. The video began to play. Sophia standing confidently before a panel of professors, presenting her thesis on absent fathers in literature. "The pattern of paternal abandonment," she was saying, "is often complicated by financial support that masks emotional neglect. The fathers in these narratives believe money can substitute for presence." I froze the video, her words hitting me like physical blows. Was this how she saw me? As someone who'd tried to buy her affection rather than earn it through presence. But I had tried to be present. Diane had been the one to leave, taking Sophia with her. I'd been the one fighting for every weekend visit, every phone call. Unless Sophia had been told a different story entirely. I reached for my phone again and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Julie, it's Tom Jennings. I need to talk to you about Diane and Sophia." Julie had been Diane's best friend during our marriage. They'd had a falling out shortly after the divorce, one of many relationships Diane had severed during that time. "Tom?" Julie sounded surprised. "I haven't heard from you in ages. Is everything okay?" "No," I said simply. "I need to know what Diane told Sophia about why we divorced. The real reason." Julie's long silence told me everything. "You should come over," she finally said. "There's a lot you don't know." Julie's living room hadn't changed much in 5 years. The same floral couch, the same collection of ceramic birds on the mantel. What had changed was Julie herself. Her once vibrant red hair was now streaked with grey. and there was a caution in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I should have called you years ago," she said, setting down 2 mugs of coffee on the table between us. "But Diane threatened to sue me for defamation if I ever spoke to you or Sophia." "Threatened to sue you? For what?" Julie took a deep breath. "For telling the truth about why she left." Over the next hour, Julie revealed a narrative so different from what I'd understood that it felt like she was describing strangers, not my ex-wife and daughter. "Diane met Robert 2 years before she left you, at a fundraiser for the hospital. They started their affair almost immediately." Julie's voice was flat, clinical. "When she decided to leave, she knew she needed Sophia to choose to go with her. Robert's prenup had a substantial bonus if she brought her child to the marriage, something about his image as a family man. So she told Sophia I was having an affair," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Julie nodded. "Not just an affair. She told Sophia you'd had a second family for years, a girlfriend with 2 kids in Vermont that you supported financially. She even showed Sophia fake bank statements, cancelled checks." My hands began to shake so badly that coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug. "But that's insane. There was never anyone else." "I know that. I told her I wouldn't support her lie. That's when our friendship ended." Julie looked away. "But Sophia was 16, vulnerable. Diane spent months feeding her this story, showing her evidence of your betrayal. By the time Diane actually left you, Sophia already believed you'd betrayed them both for years. But the visitations, the weekends, obligation," Julie said softly. "Diane convinced Sophia that you were only seeing her out of guilt, that your real focus was your other family. She told Sophia that you'd agreed to pay for college because you'd been caught and were trying to buy her silence." I set down my mug, afraid I might drop it. "And Robert, what was his role in all this?" "Robert played savior, the man who rescued them from your duplicity. He even hired someone to pose as your girlfriend once, had her call the house when he knew Sophia would answer." The room seemed to tilt around me. Every interaction with my daughter over the last 5 years now appeared in a sinister new light. Her coldness, her reluctance to visit, her increasing demands for money, all of it stemming from a monstrous lie. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Julie stood and walked to a drawer in her desk. "Because of this." She handed me a thumb drive. "Diane's former assistant sent it to me 3 months ago. She'd been instructed to delete everything when they planned the move to Switzerland, but she kept copies, emails between Diane and Robert going back 7 years, voice recordings, the original bank statements before they were photoshopped. Why would the assistant risk her job?" Julie's expression darkened. "Because Robert did the same thing to his first wife, created elaborate fictions to alienate the children from their mother. The assistant had a crisis of conscience when she realized it was happening again." I stared at the thumb drive in my palm. "And Sophia's graduation? Why exclude me from that? The move to Switzerland, most likely. They're leaving today, aren't they?" When I nodded, Julie continued, "If you'd been at the graduation, you might have heard about it from other parents, from Sophia's friends. This way they're gone before you realize what's happening." "But why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why take her to Switzerland at all? She's an adult now." "Because she's still useful," Julie said bluntly. "Robert's new position requires a family image, and according to his emails, he's arranged a job for Sophia at the bank, a job that keeps her dependent on him." I left Julie's house with the thumb drive and a growing sense of urgency. It was almost 2:30 p.m. The private jet to Boston would leave in 30 minutes. I drove toward the airfield, my mind racing through options. I couldn't physically stop them from leaving. I had no legal standing. Sophia was 22, free to go wherever she wanted. And confronting them directly would only make me appear exactly as they'd portrayed me. Desperate, unhinged. I pulled into the airfield parking lot just as a sleek private jet was taxiing toward the runway. Through the fence, I could see the Caldwell name emblazoned on the tail. Too late. I sat in my car, watching the jet take off, carrying my daughter away on a foundation of lies. The helplessness I felt was suffocating. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Jennings, this is Melissa Reed, Professor Harmon's assistant at Amherst. Sophia left something else for you. Can you come to the English Deputy's office tomorrow?" The next morning, I arrived at the ivy-covered building that housed Sophia's department. Melissa, a serious-looking young woman with thick glasses, greeted me with a professional smile. "Sophia asked me to hold this until after she'd left," she explained, handing me a sealed envelope. "She said you'd understand when you opened it." Inside was a handwritten letter and a key. "Dad, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I can't talk to you directly. They're always watching, always listening. Robert has people, connections. He monitors my calls, my emails, even my bank accounts. I've been trying to tell you for years, but I couldn't find a way that wouldn't put you in danger. The things they told me about you, I believed them at first. But last year, I found one of Mum's old phones, saw messages that didn't match her story, started to question everything. The thesis I wrote, it was my way of working through the lies, of understanding how I'd been manipulated. Professor Harmon helped me see the patterns, though she didn't know she was analyzing my actual life. I can't refuse to go to Switzerland, not yet. Robert has threatened to ruin your business, to fabricate evidence of tax fraud. He's done it before to others who crossed him, but I've been gathering evidence. The key is to a storage unit in Springfield, Unit 423. Everything is there. Recordings, documents, the original prenuptial agreement with the clause about me. I have to play along until I'm safely away from them. I'll establish myself in Geneva, then find a way to get free. It may take months. I'm so sorry about graduation. They told me if I invited you, they'd make good on their threats. Missing it was better than seeing you destroyed. I love you, Dad. I always have. And I'm coming back. Sophia, I read the letter 3 times, emotions washing over me in waves. Relief that Sophia hadn't rejected me, rage at the manipulation she'd endured, fear for her safety in Switzerland. That afternoon I visited the storage unit. Inside were 6 carefully organized boxes of evidence, far more comprehensive than what Julie's thumb drive contained. Bank records showing the millions Robert had moved offshore, tax documents with clear evidence of fraud, recordings of threats made to former employees, business partners, even his ex-wife. There was also a separate file about me, detailing the elaborate fiction they'd created, photos of a woman and children labeled as my secret family, falsified bank statements, even scripts for phone calls, designed to convince Sophia of my betrayal. The final box contained a letter from an attorney in Boston, dated just 1 week earlier. Ms. Jennings, as requested, I've reviewed the materials you provided. There is sufficient evidence for criminal charges of fraud, tax evasion, and witness intimidation. However, given Mr. Caldwell's connections, I strongly advise establishing yourself in a secure location before proceeding. The Geneva office of our firm can assist you once you've arrived. The power of attorney document you've signed will allow your father to act on your behalf should you be unable to communicate freely. The evidence is strongest when presented as a complete narrative of Mr. Caldwell's pattern of behavior across multiple victims. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Michaels, Escarcelas attached, was a notarized power of attorney form, signed by Sophia and witnessed by Professor Harmon. I sat on the floor of the storage unit, surrounded by the truth that had been hidden from us both. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She'd been protecting me, working methodically to gather evidence while appearing to comply with their demands. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the attorney's letterhead. "Ms. Michaels, this is Thomas Jennings. I believe you've been working with my daughter, Sophia." "Mr. Jennings," the attorney replied, her voice steady and professional. "I've been expecting your call. Do you have access to the files?" "Yes, all of them." "Good, then we can begin." 3 months later, I stood in the arrival terminal at Boston Logan International Airport, scanning the faces of passengers emerging from the Geneva flight. Robert Caldwell had been indicted on multiple charges of fraud and tax evasion. Diane was facing charges as an accomplice. The carefully constructed empire they'd built was crumbling, their assets frozen, their reputations in tatters. And then I saw her, Sophia, pulling a single suitcase, her face thinner than I remembered, but her eyes clear and determined. She stopped when she saw me, then dropped her bag and ran, colliding with me in an embrace that made up for 5 years of distance built on lies. "Dad," she whispered against my shoulder, "it's over. I'm home." So over dinner that night in a quiet restaurant far from the Harrison, Sophia filled in the final pieces of the story. How she'd smuggled evidence out of Robert's home office, how Professor Harmon had connected her with the attorney, how she'd maintained the facade of compliance until the indictments were filed and she could safely return. "I almost told you so many times," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "But they were always watching. The graduation was the hardest. I knew how much it would hurt you." "You did what you had to do," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And you found a way to tell me the truth, even when they thought they'd won." "I'm still not sure they haven't damaged us beyond repair," she admitted. 5 years of believing their lies about you, it changes a person." "Then we start again," I said simply, "one truth at a time." The next day we drove to Amherst together. The campus was quiet in late summer, most students still away on break. We sat on a bench near the English department, where Sophia had spent 4 years learning to analyze narratives while living inside a false one. "My thesis defense," she said suddenly. "Did you watch it?" I nodded. "It hurt at first. I thought you were talking about me." She smiled sadly. "I was, but not in the way you thought. I was writing about the father I'd been told you were, absent emotionally while present financially. It was only when I studied the literature, the patterns, that I started to see the manipulation for what it was." She pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to me. Inside was a new document titled "Reclaiming Narrative, Reconstruction of Family Truth After Systematic Deception." "My new project," she explained. "Professor Harmon is helping me turn it into a book. She says it might help other families who've been torn apart by similar manipulations." "A book," I repeated, pride washing through me. "That's amazing, Sophia." She leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so natural it made my heart ache for all the times we'd missed it. "It starts with the daughter asking her father about a graduation," she said softly, "and ends with the truth finally setting them both free." As we sat there, I realized that while Robert and Diane had taken 5 years from us, they hadn't managed to take what mattered most, the unbreakable bond between father and daughter. A connection strong enough to survive even the most elaborate deception. Some truths, once reclaimed, can never be stolen again.